Welcome to StoriesX, when a lowly council worker turns courtroom tables with his engineering smarts. A private prosecution aimed at shielding a privileged record backfires spectacularly. If you're passionate about uncovering hidden truths and love a good twist, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our community for more mind-blowing stories. Let's dive in. I still remember that crisp autumn afternoon when, as a newly hired council worker, I was driving one of our heavy-duty pickup trucks on my routine route. I had always prided myself on my cautious driving and my engineering background, which taught me to respect every force of nature, even the unpredictable behavior of other drivers. Out of nowhere, a young driver named Jake Thompson pulled out in front of me. One moment, I was maintaining a steady 30 miles per hour, and the next, there was a jarring impact. Metal crunched, glass shattered, and in a heartbeat, both vehicles were written off. I gripped the steering wheel so hard I could feel my knuckles turn white. An officer soon arrived on the scene. "Sir, are you all right?" he asked, genuine concern in his tone. "I'm fine," I replied, though my heart was still racing. "Just a shock, that's all." The police meticulously measured skid marks and took notes. Their investigation later confirmed that I wasn't at fault. Jake had misjudged the road, and despite the spectacle of the crash, he sustained only minor injuries. With the insurers taking over the wrecked vehicles, I thought the matter was closed. For weeks, life resumed its normal pace. I returned to work at the council, confident that the incident was just one of those that happens moments on the job. Then, out of the blue, a letter from the council's solicitors arrived. I sat at my desk, reading in disbelief as I learned I was being summoned to court as a defendant. I called my friend and colleague, David, immediately. "David, you won't believe this," I said, my voice tight with frustration. "I'm being charged for that accident. They're claiming I'm at fault. Are you serious?" David replied, his tone a mix of shock and sympathy. "But the police cleared you, didn't they?" "Exactly," I replied. Apparently, Jake's mother, Mrs. Thompson, is determined that her son's record stays spotless. She's launched a private prosecution against me because, well, I'm just a lowly council worker. They're banking on the fact that I'll crumble before the high-priced law firm she hired. The day of the court summons finally arrived. I walked into the Crown Court feeling a heady mix of indignation and determination. In the packed courtroom, I saw Mrs. Thompson sitting with an air of self-righteous satisfaction, her eyes twinkling maliciously behind her barrister, Mr. Richards. Their confidence seemed to fill the room, but I knew the facts were on my side. During the proceedings, Mr. Richards leaned forward and challenged me sharply. "If you weren't speeding, how do you explain that Jake's car spun 360 degrees and landed on the central reservation?" he demanded. "I have police sketches and measurements that confirm a full 360-degree rotation, a tremendous impact. Surely, that could only happen if you were exceeding the speed limit." I took a steadying breath and responded, "That's simple, Mr. Richards. I was driving at a controlled speed of 30 miles per hour, about 13.5 meters per second, in a 2.5-ton truck. Given the mass differential, a large portion of my vehicle's momentum would have transferred to Mr. Thompson's lighter car upon impact. This kinetic energy, especially hitting the rear quarter, was more than sufficient to spin his vehicle completely. I can provide the precise calculations if you'd like." The courtroom fell silent as both barristers exchanged stunned glances. Judge Peterson, a no-nonsense man with a reputation for fairness, looked at me intently. "How is it that you know all of this?" he inquired. I replied calmly, "I'm a qualified engineer, sir. I performed these calculations countless times. Although I now work for the council, my background has taught me to analyze such events logically." After a brief recess during which Mr. Richards shuffled through his papers in defeat, Judge Peterson ultimately ruled in my favor. To my astonishment, he even asked if I wished to claim damages, a complete reversal of what Mrs. Thompson and her team had expected. Walking out of the courtroom that day, I couldn't help but reflect on the absurdity of it all. I had been cleared by the police, and the physics of the accident were undeniable. Yet, because of one mother's determination to preserve her son's future, I was forced to defend myself in court. I paused on the courthouse steps, taking in the cool morning air, and thought to myself, sometimes truth is hidden in plain sight, and sometimes it takes a bit of science to reveal it. That day marked the beginning of a long and unexpected journey. Little did I know, this collision was not only a test of my driving skills, but also a trial of my character. As I prepared for what lay ahead, I knew one thing for sure. I would stand by the facts, armed with logic and a determination to prove that even in the chaos of a spectacular accident, truth and science would prevail. After the gavel fell, and the judge ruled in my favor, I left the courtroom feeling a mix of relief and lingering disbelief. I had stood my ground, armed with nothing more than my engineering knowledge and a steadfast commitment to the truth. But as I walked back to the council office, the whispers of the day's proceedings still echoed in my mind. In the crowded corridor of the Crown Court building, I bumped into my friend David, who had been waiting anxiously outside. "Man, I heard everything," he said, lowering his voice. "They said that Mrs. Thompson looked like she was boiling over, and her barrister couldn't stop rattling off every technical detail you laid out." I managed a wry smile. "I don't envy her at all. It must have cost her a fortune, both financially and in reputation. But, I've always kept parts of my past hidden. I had another life before joining the council, one that I'd rather keep private." David's eyes widened. "Really? I had no idea. But listen, you handled it like a pro. They didn't see it coming." The victory in court was not the end of the story, however. That very afternoon, while I was sorting through my emails at the office, I received an unexpected call from Mrs. Henderson, the council's legal advisor. "I'm calling to congratulate you on your performance today," she said in a measured tone. "But there's more. I just got word that the opposing law firm is considering an appeal. They believe that your background as a lowly council worker might be used to question your credibility, despite your impressive qualifications." I sighed, recalling every moment in the courtroom when their insinuations about my driving record and past speeding fines were laid out for all to see. "I understand," I replied, "but the physics don't lie, and neither do the facts. I'm confident the appeal won't hold up." Later that evening, I met with David over coffee at a quiet diner near the office. Between sips of lukewarm coffee, I confided, "David, I've been careful to leave my past behind. Before working for the council, I was deeply involved in high-level engineering projects. I earned a reputation as someone who could solve complex problems, and I used to work with some of the brightest minds in the industry. I never imagined that knowledge would come back to haunt me, or rather, be used against me, because someone couldn't bear the thought of their son's record being tarnished." David shook his head in disbelief. "It's outrageous. They're trying to use your success as a weapon against you, to paint you as some sort of dangerous driver who's been hiding behind fancy calculations. But the truth is, you're one of the most level-headed people I know." His words did little to ease the weight of the situation, though. Over the next few days, I found myself fielding calls from local journalists and even a few curious council employees. Many wanted to know how a routine accident could lead to such a bizarre legal battle. One evening, my supervisor, Mr. Reynolds, stopped by my small apartment. "You handled yourself admirably today," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "The council is proud to have someone like you representing us. But I worry, if this appeal goes forward, it could put us all in a tough spot. We'll need to prepare for any fallout." That conversation haunted me. I spent long nights rereading the accident report and my court transcripts, retracing every calculation and technical detail that had saved me in court. The memory of Judge Peterson's curious gaze and Mr. Richards' frustrated scoffs replayed over and over in my mind. I even found myself scribbling notes in a worn-out notebook, my old habit from high school when I'd lose myself in equations and problem-solving. One rainy afternoon, while leaving the office, I encountered Mrs. Thompson in the building's foyer. Her eyes were narrowed, and her face was a mask of barely concealed fury. "We'll be seeing you in court again," she hissed. "This isn't over, not by a long shot." I offered a calm, measured response. "Mrs. Thompson, all I want is for justice to prevail. I'm not in this to ruin anyone's reputation. I'm in it to ensure that the facts aren't distorted for personal gain." Her lips twisted into a bitter smile before she turned and strode away. That brief encounter left me with a cold knot in my stomach. It was clear that despite my victory, the battle was far from over. The high-priced law firm was not going to let go easily, and I was now their prime target for an appeal that would question not only my competence, but also my very identity as a professional. That night, alone in my apartment, I reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought me here. I had always believed that truth and science would ultimately triumph. Now, as I prepared for the looming threat of an appeal, I realized that standing by the facts might not be enough. The system was as much about perception as it was about evidence, and I needed to be ready for the next round of challenges. I closed my eyes and resolved to brace myself for what was coming. I wasn't just fighting for my record. I was defending the integrity of the council and my own professional legacy. No matter how hard they tried to tarnish my reputation, I would remain steadfast. After all, I had already proven that even a routine collision could be explained through logic and reason, and that was a truth I intended to uphold, no matter the cost. After the courtroom verdict, life seemed to settle into an uneasy calm, at least on the surface. Though I had won the case and cleared my name, the unexpected legal battle left me with a lingering sense of vulnerability. I returned to my duties at the council, but every call and email reminded me that the fight wasn't entirely over. One brisk morning, as I sipped coffee in my small office, the phone rang. It was Helen Matthews, the council solicitor. "I wish I had better news," she began, her tone measured yet heavy with concern. "Mrs. Thompson's legal team is already preparing an appeal. They're arguing that your prior speeding fines cast doubt on your ability to drive safely." I sighed and set my cup down. "Helen, the facts are clear. The police report proved I wasn't speeding, and the physics backed that up. I'm an engineer. I understand momentum and kinetic energy better than most. Their appeal is nothing more than a tactic to intimidate me." She paused before replying. "I know, but you must be prepared for more court sessions. They're not going to let this go quietly, especially with the hefty law firm they've hired on their side." Later that day, I met with my colleague David at our favorite lunch spot near the council offices. Over a quick sandwich and a side of chips, he said, "Man, you really rattled them in court today. I heard Judge Peterson even asked if you wanted to claim damages. That must have been a blow to Mrs. Thompson's ego." I chuckled ruefully. "You have no idea. I can picture her now, purple-faced, gnashing her teeth, thinking I was some lowly worker who'd crumble under pressure. She wasn't supposed to know I had another life before joining the council, a background in engineering that runs deep." David leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Do you think this appeal will drag on? I mean, you're already a local hero in our office for standing up for the truth." I looked out the window, my mind racing with the technical details that had saved me in court. Technically, it shouldn't. I explained how a 2.5-ton truck moving at 30 miles per hour imparts enough momentum to spin a much lighter vehicle, a matter of physics. Yet they're twisting every minor detail to suit their narrative. I just hope my explanation resonates with the higher-ups in the appeal. That evening, I sat down at my desk at home and began reviewing the case files once more. The sound of the printer whirring as documents were fed reminded me of the precision of engineering. Every measurement, every calculation, backed by scientific rigor. I recalled my courtroom exchange vividly. Your client's vehicle spun 360 degrees. The opposing barrister had barked, slamming his sketches on the table. "That can only happen if you were speeding." I had replied calmly. I was driving at a steady 30 miles per hour, and given the weight difference between my truck and his car, The conservation of momentum ensured that a significant portion of my vehicle's kinetic energy was transferred. In other words, the impact was sufficient to rotate his car completely. I could provide the full calculations if required. I smiled at the memory, the courtroom's stunned silence still echoing in my mind. It was a moment of clarity, where science had triumphed over baseless accusations. But now, in the quiet solitude of my study, that victory felt bittersweet. The legal reprisal was far from over, and I knew I'd have to prepare for a long fight. As I drafted a response to the potential appeal, my phone buzzed with a message from Mr. Reynolds, my supervisor. "You handled today like a pro. Stay strong. The council stands with you." His words were reassuring, yet they carried an undercurrent of apprehension. The next few months promised to be turbulent. That night, I sat down with my wife, Karen. Over dinner, she gently asked, "How are you holding up with all this legal drama?" I looked into her caring eyes and replied, "I'm fine, Karen. I know the science, I know the facts, but it's frustrating to have my competence questioned just because I'm a council worker. They're trying to paint me as a reckless driver because of a couple of speeding tickets from a decade ago. The truth is, I did what was right." Karen reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "You're brilliant and everyone here knows it. Don't let their tactics shake your confidence." Her support warmed me, reminding me that behind every technical dispute and legal challenge, there were people who believed in me. Over the following weeks, the atmosphere at work grew tense as whispers of the impending appeal circulated among colleagues. Some feared that the legal battle would drain resources and tarnish the council's reputation. Others, however, admired my steadfastness in the face of such unwarranted aggression. One afternoon, during a routine meeting, I was approached by a junior engineer named Mark. "Sir, I've always admired how you explained that collision in court. I'm studying engineering, and I want to know, how do you stay so calm under pressure?" I smiled and replied, "Mark, it's all about understanding the fundamentals. When you know the physics behind the events, you can see past the emotional rhetoric and stick to the facts. In our work, precision and clarity always win." His nod of appreciation bolstered my resolve. Despite the looming appeal, I realized that my duty extended beyond just defending my record. It was about upholding the integrity of our work and ensuring that truth prevailed over prejudice. As I closed another day with more notes on the case, I couldn't shake the thought that this legal skirmish, although deeply personal, was also a testament to the power of rational thought in a world increasingly swayed by emotion and bias. With every calculation and every measured response, I was reinforcing the idea that facts matter and that science and reason will always outlast the fleeting passions of personal vendettas. I resolved then to prepare even more meticulously for the upcoming appeal, determined to show that a council worker's record was not defined by a collision, but by the unwavering commitment to truth. And as I locked my study that night, I felt a steady calm settle over me, an engineer's calm, rooted in the certainty that no matter how convoluted the legal challenges, the law of physics and the power of logic would eventually triumph. The courtroom atmosphere was electric the day my case reached its most critical juncture. Even though I'd already won my initial hearing, the opposing counsel wasn't ready to let go. As I sat there, reviewing my notes one last time, I couldn't help but feel that the final confrontation was approaching, a showdown between cold, hard science and high-priced legal theatrics. Before the session began, my attorney, Mr. Daniels, gave me a firm nod. "Remember," he said quietly, "stick to the facts. Your engineering background is your best defense." I nodded back, the weight of the coming challenge steadying my resolve. It wasn't long before the opposing barrister, Mr. Richards, a man with an air of smug superiority, rose to address the court. His voice rang out as he leaned forward over his notes. "So, if you were not speeding," he began sharply, "how do you account for the fact that my client's vehicle was spun 360 degrees and knocked onto the central reservation of the road?" His eyes swept the room as he continued. I have the sketches from the police and the measurements from the scene. 360 degrees. That was a considerable impact. How could this possibly happen if you were not driving in excess of the speed limit? A murmur ran through the courtroom, and for a moment, the tension was palpable. I took a deep breath, steadying myself before I responded. "That's easy," I said, my voice calm and measured. I was driving a 2.5-ton pickup truck at 30 miles per hour, roughly 13.5 meters per second. In contrast, my opponent's vehicle is a small car, weighing only about a third of my truck's mass. According to the law of conservation of momentum, a significant portion of the momentum from my vehicle would transfer to his car upon impact. Given the mass differential and the fact that the collision occurred at his car's rear quarter, the kinetic energy imparted was more than sufficient to spin his vehicle completely and send it onto the central reservation. I paused to let the logic settle over the courtroom. I can provide the mass/velocity and vector calculations for you if you'd like more details. Both barristers fell silent, their eyes locked on me as if trying to decipher every word I had spoken. The judge, Judge Peterson, a stern man with a reputation for fairness, cleared his throat and then asked, "How is it you know all this?" I met his gaze evenly. "I'm qualified as an engineer, sir. I used to make these calculations all the time. Though I now work for the council, my background remains part of who I am." For a long, tense moment, Mr. Richards shuffled his papers and exchanged a look with his colleague. Finally, with a resigned sigh, he muttered, "No," acknowledging that he had no further rebuttal to offer. The judge's gavel fell with finality as he ruled decisively in my favor. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of stunned silence and low murmurs of disbelief. Judge Peterson then turned to me with a measured smile. "Given the facts and the evidence presented, I find in favor of the defendant," he declared. "Furthermore, would you like to claim any damages from the opposing party?" His question hung in the air, unexpected and ironic, a complete reversal of what Mrs. Thompson's team had anticipated. I paused for a moment, considering the irony. Here I was, a council worker with a quiet, unassuming demeanor, now being offered the opportunity to claim damages from a private prosecution that had cost one determined mother a small fortune. "No, Your Honor," I replied calmly. "I am satisfied with the ruling and simply wish to see that justice prevails." My tone was even, betraying none of the internal relief and satisfaction I felt at finally exposing the flaws in their argument. As the courtroom slowly emptied, I lingered for a moment by the bench, reflecting on the surreal nature of it all. I recalled the bitter look on Mrs. Thompson's face as she sat with her barrister, her hope of protecting her son's pristine record now shattered by the undeniable logic of physics and common sense. I exchanged a brief, knowing glance with Mr. Daniels, who gave me an encouraging smile as we gathered our documents. Outside the courthouse, the crisp air did little to dissipate the heavy feeling of vindication mingled with apprehension for what might follow. A reporter approached me, her voice hushed yet insistent. "Can you explain, in layman's terms, how the momentum transfer worked in this case?" she asked, eyes wide with curiosity. I smiled and explained briefly. In simple terms, when a heavy vehicle like a pickup truck collides with a much lighter car, the smaller car absorbs a disproportionate amount of kinetic energy. This causes it to spin dramatically upon impact. The reporter scribbled furiously, her notes a testament to the clarity that science can bring to even the most contentious of disputes. Later that afternoon, over a cup of coffee in a quiet diner near the court, I met with David and Mr. Daniels. "I still can't believe they tried to pin this on me," David remarked incredulously. "They used your past speeding fines from 10 years ago as ammunition." I shook my head. "It was all a tactic, a way to paint me as a habitual dangerous driver," I said, "when the evidence clearly shows that I was well within the speed limit that day. The numbers don't lie." Mr. Daniels leaned in and added, "You handled that moment brilliantly. They never expected you to counter with precise calculations." It's a classic example of reason triumphing over emotion. I nodded in agreement, though a part of me couldn't help but worry about the lingering shadow of an appeal from Mrs. Thompson's high-priced law firm. Even as I savored this victory, I knew the battle for my reputation might not be over yet. That evening, as I returned home and sat at my desk, I reviewed the transcripts of the courtroom proceedings. The memory of my calm, precise explanation echoed in my mind, a reminder that truth, backed by science, was a powerful ally. I also thought of the look in Judge Peterson's eyes as he questioned the opposing counsel's inability to disprove my calculations. It was a look that said, "Facts win." And for that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of justice. Yet, I couldn't shake the lingering thought that this victory, as sweet as it was, might only be a prelude to further legal challenges. The system, as I knew it, was as much about perception as it was about hard evidence. And while I was ready to defend my record with every fact at my disposal, I also knew that the fight for truth could take unexpected turns. As I turned off the desk lamp that night, I felt a calm resolve settling over me. I had stood up in a courtroom, armed with nothing but logic and the principles of physics, and emerged victorious. In that moment, I understood that my journey wasn't merely about a traffic collision. It was about upholding the integrity of the truth, even when powerful adversaries tried to distort it. And that, I realized, was only the beginning. The day the final judgment was announced still lingers in my memory, a mixture of relief, vindication, and the quiet realization that my life had irrevocably changed. After the judge's decisive ruling in my favor, the courtroom slowly emptied, leaving behind an air of subdued shock and reluctant acceptance. I stepped out into the crisp afternoon light, my mind buzzing with thoughts of what the verdict truly meant for me and for the local council. Outside the courthouse, reporters and well-wishers gathered. I noticed a familiar face. David, who had been my steadfast friend throughout this ordeal, was waiting with a wide, relieved grin. "You did it, man," he said as we exchanged a firm handshake. "I knew that your facts would speak louder than their rhetoric." His words, simple yet sincere, reminded me that sometimes truth has a way of triumphing over pretense. Later that day, I received a call from Mr. Daniels, my attorney. "Congratulations," he said in a measured tone. "Not only did we win, but the appeal is now off the table. The opposing counsel has decided not to press further, and word is that the counsel solicitors are reviewing the matter internally." There was a note of satisfaction in his voice, a satisfaction that came not only from winning a case, but from proving that science and reason have their rightful place in the halls of justice. That evening, I gathered with a few close colleagues and friends at a modest celebration in a local diner. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by anecdotes and laughter that helped erase, if only temporarily, the strain of the past few months. Over a cup of steaming coffee, David raised his glass and said, "To the man who proved that a little engineering can topple even the mightiest of arguments." Cheers erupted around the table, and for a moment, I allowed myself to bask in the warmth of that shared victory. Yet, as the night wore on, a reflective silence settled in. I found myself alone on the back porch of my modest apartment, staring out at the darkened streets and pondering the journey that had brought me here. I recalled every detail: the fateful collision, the meticulous investigation by the police, the bitter surprise of being summoned as a defendant, and finally, the courtroom showdown where I had laid out the immutable laws of physics. Each moment was etched in my mind like a series of calculated steps leading to this point of resolution. The experience had taught me more than I could have ever anticipated. It wasn't just about proving that I wasn't speeding or that I wasn't at fault. It was about challenging the arrogance of those who believed that a lowly council worker could be easily manipulated by a high-priced law firm. It was about standing up for truth in a system that often values perception over hard evidence. And in the end, it was a personal reaffirmation that knowledge, no matter how technical or mundane it may seem, can be a powerful weapon in the fight for justice. In the days that followed, I received heartfelt notes from colleagues and even anonymous messages from members of the public. One message read, "Your clear explanation and calm demeanor in court restored my faith in fairness. Thank you for standing up for what is right." Such messages reinforced that my struggle had a broader impact, reminding everyone that integrity and logic still have a place in our daily lives. Of course, the ordeal wasn't without its scars. I still caught myself thinking about Mrs. Thompson, whose fierce determination had led her to challenge the system so aggressively. I wondered if, somewhere in her, there was a moment of realization that the cost of preserving a spotless record might be too high. But I also understood that, for her, this was not merely a legal battle. It was a fight for her son's future, a future that she believed must remain untarnished at any cost. In that sense, our conflict was a clash of very different ideals. In a final conversation with Mr. Daniels on my way home from work, he said, "You know, this case will be remembered not just as a legal victory, but as a testament to the power of facts over fiction." I nodded silently, realizing that while the legal battle was over, its ripples would be felt for a long time within the community and even within my own life. As I sat at my desk that night, reviewing the accident report and my own notes one last time, I felt a profound sense of closure. I had defended my reputation with the precision of an engineer and the determination of a man who refuses to be undermined by prejudice and hubris. Now, with the case behind me, I looked toward the future. A future where I could return to my duties at the council, confident that I had not only upheld the law but also proven that truth, when armed with knowledge and conviction, always finds a way to prevail. And so, as the sun rose the next morning, casting a warm glow over the city, I stepped outside with a renewed sense of purpose. I was no longer just a council worker defined by a single accident. I was a defender of truth, a proponent of science, and above all, a man who had learned that sometimes the smallest details can change the course of an entire life. The battle was over, but the lessons would remain forever. A reminder that integrity and logic are the bedrock upon which justice is built. If you found this story inspiring and thought-provoking, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment below with your thoughts. Your support means everything to us. It helps us continue to share powerful narratives that show how truth, integrity, and the power of science can overcome even the toughest challenges. Thank you for being part of StoriesX. Together, we can make a difference.